Welcome to Julien Mascarade's podcast talk. We would like to thank our esteemed guest, Randy Olson, for joining. From Harvard-educated marine biologist to Hollywood filmmaker and published author, Randy uses narrative storytelling through the ABT framework to simplify complex topics and make storytelling truly unforgettable.
Most important part of my childhood was ages 5 to 10 in Hawaii.
Ooh, fun. Wait, which island?
Mauna Oahu.
Ooh.
It was long, long ago. And my father was in the Army. He was an officer. And we just got dream conditions there. So we moved there 6 months after Hawaii became a state, 1960. Wow. And they used to have these officers' quarters that don't exist anymore. It was called Fort Kamehameha. And it was right on the beach, right at the mouth of Pearl Harbor, and just a tiny little strip of beach that was kind of tucked away from all the commercial area. There wasn't that much of a commercial area in 1960 in Hawaii.
I bet.
And the quarters that we lived in were just these old wooden quarters with screen doors and things like that. And our backyard went grass right to the sand. And so literally I sat there in the backyard and walked down the sand. And then at low tide, you could wade out probably like a quarter mile out to this reef out there. And then all the Navy ships would go by all day long. And it was just incredible. And I was like 5, 6 years old, and all my buddies and I, our big thing to do was we had these dip nets, and we go out there and we catch blue crabs and just scoop them up like in knee deep water, and then bring them back to the beach and boil them up and sit there and eat crabs on the beach. And my mother used to be kind of the ringleader that would come out and catch them with us, and she would take care of setting it all up and boiling the crabs. And I think that really put the ocean deep into my veins at that age. Right. And as a result, we left there after about 5 years, and eventually I grew up mostly in Kansas in the Midwest, way away from the ocean.
Man, that's huge. That's a huge
difference.
Right,
but the connection to the ocean never went away.
Of course.
And so
did you go back and forth?
Yeah, I was constantly driven to want to travel and to go back to the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico and all those things. I was always trying to find a way to take trips and go there. And in high school, and then in college a lot. And then, the ocean is deeply set in my soul. And as a result, I eventually became a marine biologist and did that career for about 20 years.
So, talk to me a little bit about that. So you originally went to, what school? Like, what did you go undergrad for bio?
So my number one interest, I would say, in my last 2 years of high school and first 2 years of college was alcohol. Literally.
We all go through that at one point or another.
The culture.
What kind? Was there a specific kind?
Just beer. Beer.
Well, there you go. That's
the culture of Kansas in the early 70s was like that. And, it's very athletics oriented society. And then just shit tons of beer drinking. Older guys from my high school, all there living in the fraternities. And so then just living for the weekends, going up there to fraternity parties. Right. So by the time I was ready to go to college, I had such horrible grades in high school, I couldn't get into any major college other than the state university, which back then had to take any graduate of high school in Kansas. So you automatically got in there. And the tuition was like $500 for the semester total,
That's very different than nowadays.
Just a little bit. Exactly. Totally different. And so it was just complete alcohol culture. That's all it was living in the fraternity. They had this thing called Country Club Week, the week before classes start, where you showed up there and lived in the fraternity, and all you did was drink night and day and throw all these big parties. And that was it. And craziness. And then with all these farm boys from Western Kansas that were in our fraternity, there were like 70 guys.
Do you have like your best story? Maybe
they became exactly, when we talk about what I do nowadays, which is story, that's where I really kind of formed. I think, my brain wasn't done developing. I was 18 years old. And we would go out at night to the bars, everybody get drunk, and the alcohol made the interesting things happen. When you think about it, like you go out there and sit in the bar and nobody has a drink, nothing interesting happens. There, the frat boys just drank like lunatics, wrecked the bars. I mean, there's so many tales to tell. And then everybody slept in this big dorm full of bunk beds. And then the next morning, everybody would sober up and just be laying in bed. And then everybody start telling the story. Did you see what happened last night? This. It was all storytelling. And then they start telling stories from the farms out in Western Kansas. And it was just incredibly rich in storytelling. And those are the most entertaining characters I ever met in my life. And so that was kind of an early dose of that long before I had any interest in anything scientific. It was just imprinting on story. But I think one of the side themes I won't get into too much detail on, but after all these years and 12 books I've written on narrative structure and all the narrative training that I do with all these people, I've drifted to the pretty strong kind of belief that a major part of story is genetic. And everybody wants to think they can learn to be a better storyteller, but most folks by age 5 to 10 or something there's some that know how to tell things, and there's others just, it's not a big deal to them. They go on and on and you just see it. And so a lot of these people, and they come along to what we do, and someone walk in the door. And one guy just recently, a couple of years ago, contacted me and he said, I'm a nightingale. I said, what are you talking about? He said, the nightingale is a bird that has this ability to sing this beautiful song, but the juveniles can't sing the song until they hear an adult sing it. And if you keep them in isolation, they never hear the song, they never sing it. But the first time they hear it, it activates everything in their brain to sing that song. And he said, your narrative structure of ABT that we're going to talk about, he said, I've known it all my life. I just haven't known how to sing the song and really all the details.
But don't you feel like a lot of people, even people who have trouble with starting out and creating that story in their heads, don't you feel as though at times they're able to create it? And I feel like everybody, given the chance, given the right tools, can become an amazing storyteller. Maybe not the best, but the thing is in life, like from what at least I've recognized and I've seen from countless people that I've met, it takes one time to get lucky and to create something beautiful and amazing, right?
Yeah.
Whether it be, your profession, whether it be spiritually, whether it be anything, and create something amazing. And that's a story to tell. So everybody's got their own story. And tell me about the transition from being the scientific, very focused on, because you had tenure, right? Like you were very focused into the science world. You went to Harvard for your PhD. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about how that transitioned to getting into filmmaking.
I think the unifying thread all the way along the line is storytelling. And I spent a couple years there drinking alcohol at the University of Kansas, made a mess of everything the first year, got all C's. And then actually quit and ran away for a semester with 2 buddies.
Where did you go?
We stole my dad's car and drove out here to California for a month and wandered around the hippies, basically.
I love it.
Yep, just smoking a ton of weed and going to parties and just being hippies in 1973, debating whether or not we should go up to Idaho to see Evel Knievel jump the Snake River Canyon or not. We finally decided not to do that, but we spent the whole month out here. And then a whole bunch of things happened. I got a job in Puerto Rico working on an oceanographic project.
Wow.
And went down there and spent 3 months and really locked onto the vision.
And that was that was right after you had that.
The fall of what should have been my sophomore year.
Got it.
Dropped out at the beginning of the fall, ended up in Puerto Rico for most of that semester. And it was just an incredible experience living there with 2 other 18-year-old guys raising hell in Puerto Rico. The field work that we did there and all the diving and all the research, that just instantly connected for me. This is what I definitely want to give a shot at. So when I came back for my second year, it was kind of like I had a gap year that people talk about nowadays.
Right.
In my case, it was very practical.
I always wanted one of those, by the way. I think it's great for the spirit, for the mind to be able to center yourself and then find out exactly what you want, even if it's just by happenstance, like what you were saying.
That's it.
It's so valuable.
And I got a feeling it can be great and it can be a waste,
Yeah.
If I'm going to take a gap year because I can't think of anything else, that could be a waste. In my case, I just knew I was sick of being directionless in college. I started off that whole first year, I was an economics major and I had no aptitude for economics. And so that's why I was getting all these crummy grades. But then I did come back with a really clear vision. And I began this bizarre part of my whole life to this very day, which is in the fraternity house, eat dinner with everybody, and then go to those bunk beds and pass out as all the dudes went out to the bars. And then at midnight, they'd come back drunk and I would have slept for 4 hours and they'd wake me up. And I'd get up and listen to their stories, and then I'd go study from midnight till sunrise.
Wow.
And that was when I got into the focus, and I got, almost all A's that semester, and that was enough to help me transfer out of there. Then transferred to the University of Washington, which had a really good program in marine biology. and then ended up studying with the best of the best there. It was an incredible window of time that they had some of the best marine biologists in the world. And then one of them was very prominent scientist who ended up in the National Academy of Sciences, had a huge amount of clout. And he and I just hit it off socially from day one. I became his field assistant out on this island off the coast of Washington where he'd do his field work. And we'd go out there with a whole bunch of people, but camp for like 2 weeks at a time doing this research on the coast. And then he and I would sit around at night drinking wine around the fire there on the island and telling stories back and forth. Exactly. Right. And then when it came time to go to graduate school, like I had, battle scars from all those rotten grades I got early on, and I had a super low self-esteem, and I was just hoping and praying I could get into one program somewhere to do a PhD. And I came in the lab one day, he said, "Did you apply to Harvard?" And I go, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "One of my former students, professor there, I think you ought to give it a shot." And that's what happened. I applied there, and he called the guy up and said, "This guy's got a bunch of rotten grades, but trust me, he's worth taking a chance."
See, that's the crazy thing is opportunity comes knocking even when you think it won't. Sometimes you just have to put yourself in the position, right? Like you never thought applying to Harvard you would actually get in, right? And then all of a sudden, you put the effort out there, you put the intention that you're going to create this opportunity. And even though you thought it was like a shot in the dark, it happened.
Yeah. But one of the things it did teach me in life is that these social interactions are incredibly important for better or worse. And to this very day, this is what I work with the sad and pathetic science world that doesn't understand social interactions. And they are not just hampered in everything they do. As you know, they're taking a massive beating now because they don't know how to communicate what they do. They don't know how to make their case. They sit there. And there was a previous era where they were handed all the money and the funding and, we trust and respect you guys, go to work. But that era's gone away. Completely changed that up. It's all changed. Exactly. It's a very sad story nowadays. And I've lived the last 30 years in the thick of all that.
I mean, you don't see a lot of scientists on TikTok. I mean,
there you go.
Just saying, I mean, not that that's where it needs to be, but at the end of the day, that's where eyeballs are, and attention is everything. Attention is currency. So, if you can get that, I mean, you can change the world.
It would drive you crazy to listen to some of these discussions with scientists where they dismiss all that. Well, TikTok's always, it's for stupid people. I'm sorry. It runs our society.
Wow. I know. Hey, and I'm not huge into TikTok, but at the same time, I understand its value, right? There's so many eyeballs, and trying to create value for other people. You can still do that on these platforms. You can still do that in a short video with 30 seconds. You can provide enough value for that person's life to be changed.
And so you can understand my whole journey, which was that I fell in love with the oceans. Right. And, in high school, I thought I wanted to be an underwater archaeologist. I just knew I wanted to do something underwater. And then eventually, all right, I'll do the science thing if that's what will get me underwater. And I never was I was not a kid who collected bugs and flowers and things. I had no interest in nature. I kind of developed it in college. I like the logic of science. I really like that a lot. And it's very cool when science is done really well. And the whole hypothesis testing thought process is tremendous. But that said, I could never take the antisocial element of science. And it's a very antisocial profession.
Is that what tore you away from it eventually? Was that you just were kind of in this?
I just couldn't take it after a while. It's really, and scientists hate me. Some of them I think want to kill me for the things that I've said.
Right.
My first book is titled "Don't Be Such a Scientist." And it's a critique of the lack of the human dimension in the science world. The book did well. It got great reviews in Science and Nature, the most important publications, and sold enough copies to go into second printing from Island Press. But over the years, there's a lot of scientists that have grown to despise the book and me.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit.
Well, they want to believe that they're just average Joes, and they're not, the vast majority of them. It's a profession. One of the things I go through in that book is that science is built around negation. And I say verbatim in there, a scientist lives their life day in and day out with one word at the core of everything they do. And that word is no. This is the way you do science. You propose an idea and then you try and
disprove it.
Disprove it. Exactly. So all day long, you're negating things. And scientists are at their best and their proudest when somebody gives a big talk in their departmental seminar every week and somebody stands up in the audience and says, no. Everything you said is wrong because you didn't do this one transformation of the statistics, yada, yada, yada. And the whole audience like, oh, that was awesome. He just destroyed that guy.
Yeah.
They relish
there's
negation.
there's no collaboration in that. Doing that, I understand there is collaboration in communicating, right? But to the betterment of trying to maybe help or disprove the theory. I guess it really does matter what the context is, right? But at the end of the day, you found that was negative to the overall and overarching ability to create.
It is. The whole mindset is negation, because that's how you do science in the purest sense, is you don't ever promote an idea, and you get trained to have a sixth sense detection ability to pick up when some scientist is at a meeting and they're promoting their work. What I'm doing is really great new method. It just rankles you like, it's
bad. Too much. It's like overload at one point.
Well, you're not meant to be pushing forward. You're meant to be testing everything. And if we can negate everything else, then finally this thing we couldn't negate, that's the answer. But you don't go for that one and then say, look, this is the right one. It's a process of negation, which is great. And the logic of it is really impressive, but it takes a human toll on people who do it day in and day out. They become incredibly negative. They're very difficult to work with. They nitpick everything. And at the core, they don't like communication. And I've done videos where I've interviewed major scientists. One guy who's a, member of the National Academy of Engineers, I think he's a physicist. He said, the reason I went into science is because I had this vision of a laboratory that I could sit in by myself all day long and never have to talk to any human beings. And when I showed up at graduate school to do my PhD, and they told me, you're going to have to go to a scientific meeting once a year and stand up in front of hundreds of people and explain your research. He said, I felt cheated. Like I didn't sign up for that. I don't want to interact with human beings.
Yeah, that's a shame too, because I think the best things happen in science when people collaborate and create and decide these are the bottlenecks that we're facing, right?
Yep.
This is how we can move forward from those. And without that collaboration, even if somebody's smarter, you're not smart enough to not realize that there's sometimes you're going to have the wrong idea. Yeah. No matter how smart you are, right?
Yeah.
So that was the reason that you started getting into filmmaking. How did you do it? How did you say, you know what? I've got my professorship. I'm ready to move on. I'm ready to come to California to do this whole thing. Like, how did that happen?
I think it started.
What was the day? What was the moment? I want to hear the moment.
Yeah. What are you trained in narrative structure? That's
not at
exactly
all.
What you do.
Not at all.
That's what I do. I work with a lot of these scientists and say, I want you to tell me the story of the day, the hour, the minute, the moment. What was the one? Let me tell you back on one of these sorts of things. Exactly what you just said.
Yeah.
About 10, 12 years ago, the AAAS, American Association of Advancement Scientists, biggest science organization in the world based in DC. And the head of education there is my soulmate buddy, Shirley Malcolm, incredible senior scientist. And she brought me in to work with this program they have. I don't know if they still have it. It was called the Invention Ambassadors. And every year they would choose 8 scientist inventors who were like superstars that invented major things. Like one guy invented the CMOS chip that is in the cell phone cameras of everybody on the planet. These guys with giant inventions. And so and this is in one of my books and in a couple of articles. One of the first years they had me work with this guy, Steven, I remember his last name, but he used to work at Kodak in the 1970s, I think it was. And he was the first guy that invented this little thing called digital photography. And so I ended up,
little thing. That's what we're using right now, I think.
That's exactly right. He was the guy. And so what they would have me do was they put these 8 scientists and inventors together as a speaking team. They would send out for a year to different big events. They'd have them give talks about their big invention. And then they had me work with them to try and shape these talks into more of a story, less of a just listing of these all the things I did, but to actually shape it into a story that would pull people into what the main problem was. And then that became the technique exactly, which was I would push these guys. I want you to tell me that moment of invention, exactly what you just said to me.
Your eureka moment.
Eureka, right. Exactly. That's very impressive that your mind went right there. And so with this guy in particular, we spent an hour on the phone, and I swear it ended up being like psychotherapy. I might as well have had him laying down on a couch, because it's like repressed memories, and you're pushing the person. And it began with me saying that exact question, and him sort of patronizing me, saying, you don't understand. Invention is a very complex, long-term process. There's no one moment, it's just weeks and months and all these people and this and this and this. And I say, I know, I totally understand that. I've talked to these other inventors. Right now, let's get back to my question. What was the day, the hour, the moment, the minute of this
and
thing?
And that's very hard to do. It is very hard to do because it is a culmination of a lot of thought processes, of a lot of, trial and error.
Truly is. But
it all connects.
The person doesn't realize that they do have that memory in there. They've just buried it in a bunch of stuff. And that's what went on with this guy for 45 minutes.
So what was it?
So no, literally, I kept pushing him. And then finally, there's the breakthrough moment. We said, all right, hang on a second. He put the phone down. I can hear him in the back. And then he comes back, sits down. All right. I just dug through the journals there up in the bookcase. And, here it is. Sure enough, December 14th, 1975. This was the day that my assistant and I had this monitor and computer all in this big cart, and we wheeled it all the way down to Joy, the secretary, in the lobby, and we had her stand up against the sign, and we pointed this thing to her, and we typed in all this stuff, and then we wheeled it all the way back to the lab, and then we typed in all this other stuff, and it processed this stuff, and then finally there was this cloud of pixels on this screen for the first time ever.
Wow.
Capture of a human image. And right at that moment, the door opened, and Joy walked in, and she looked at it, and she said, "What's that?" And we said, "This is you." And she said, "This is going to need a lot more work," and then walked out the door. And then that ended up becoming his story that he would tell for a whole year whenever he gave this talk. But I had to fight through, and he was angry at me for a while about that.
Well, it's really hard. Like, I remember the first time, because it did take me, it's a muscle, you train it. It did take me a long time to start being able to do this type of thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's active listening. Active listening is so hard to do.
Yeah.
And then going into the back of your mind, and trying to say, what is it that,
Have
to
you
do
taken
next?
acting classes?
No.
You've never taken an improv class?
I did a musical when I was in high school.
You should toy with the idea of just going and taking one level with the groundlings of improv, not for becoming an actor. This is part of what I did with film school. Was fortunately I had a buddy that put me into a Meisner acting program that was very intense for 2 years. But that acting class, and I wasn't there to become an actor, but acting is the ultimate study of human behavior and of listening. And that's what improv is. Improv is the ultimate purified form of teaching you how to listen. And then we have Brian Palermo is my long-term buddy from the Groundlings, who co-authored one of my books with me, and he teaches the improv part of what I do in the training and trying to get these scientists to listen because they don't listen. And academics, when people start to get a lot of knowledge in their head, their ears shut down and they lose the ability to listen. And that's exactly what I deal with. And then when I wrote that first book, Don't Be Such a Scientist, and it got a nice review in Science Magazine, most important publication in the science world, but the guy who reviewed it said, "Nice book, but the guy failed to address the single biggest problem of scientists, which is their inability to listen." And as a result, when I did a second edition, I added a chapter on Don't Be Such a Poor Listener, because that's the truth. They just don't listen. And it's just maddening.
But I feel like that happens in organizations a lot too. I feel like people try to communicate a specific thing, right? And then telephone happens, especially in large organizations. I was in one of the largest commercial real estate firms.
Telephone, you mean the telephone they're propagating and things get butchered?
Yeah. Things get butchered along the way. Right. And the original message is so diluted and it's not really the same. And I get that's why a lot of large companies create core value principles and pillars and all of these different things to be able to keep people on brand and keep people focused on what are they going to do and how are they going to execute, right? But I think that having maybe people within each team, right, doing something where they're taking those core ideas and then trying to enact them, right, in each department would be great. And a lot of people don't do that. I think that would be very interesting, actually.
What sort of organizations have you worked with that had that? You got some
We didn't do that. I've never had that before. I just thought of it now as we were talking. I was like, wouldn't it be nice for somebody, once in a while to tell our little group, hey, you know what? This is, give guidance and also with tools as well. Something that I noticed, because I was in sales, right? And you learn a lot of active listening. You learn how to communicate with people. You learn how to keep people entertained and get to the meat. A lot of the people I would do sales with, they would have a lot of trouble being able to just get on the phone and ask somebody, is this what you want? Not yes or no, but are you even interested in this? Right? That's a very important question.
Yeah.
Is this something you're even interested in?
Yes.
Because if they're not interested in it, don't sell it to them. don't sell. You ask people if they're interested and then learn.
You ever heard of a guy named Christopher Lochhead? Do you know of him? Category Pirates is this whole big thing. And he's one of the big communication gurus of Silicon Valley. And so Park Howell is part of my group. He's got the podcast, The Business of Story, and he's done over 500 episodes on there. But he had on Christopher Lochhead a couple of times. And he started talking with him about the ABT, and we use this quote endlessly. Christopher Lochhead said, the reason I love this ABT thing so much is because it connects exactly with something that we have as one of our guiding principles, which is what you're saying right now. Nobody buys a solution without a problem. That's where, and we picked up on that, and we use it day in and day out now. And that's the problem with the science world. They don't feel they have a problem with communication. Right. They do a rotten job communicating COVID and climate change to begin with. And then you try and talk to them about it, try and point out with COVID, verbatim, what happened with COVID. And I ended up in the thick of what was going on with the science world and COVID communication, and lots of stories to tell there. Worked for 4 months with one of the guys that was on the advisory board for Biden. And so through him, I got the daily insights, and he was on CNN and all MSNBC day in and day out. And so I got to see how this all didn't work. And what happened was, the Biden administration put together, with the best of intentions, this first advisory board of 13 experts, but they were all scientists.
And they didn't communicate. Yeah. There was no communicator.
And I kept asking this guy, where's the communications element? And he said, well, they've got the standard kind of inside the beltway government communications people, and they're a part of this committee. And then one day they had like a 2.5 hour Zoom session, and he called me up right afterwards and began to tell me what went on. And I kept saying, where were the communications people? He said, oh, they were on the session. They just don't speak up. And this is what I've experienced. Scientists bully you with knowledge. The be all and the end all is the problem. It's the same thing that Christopher Lochhead said. Nobody buys a solution without a problem. And this is what scientists do. They come up with all these solutions, and they fail to find anybody who really's got a problem. This is what's going on with climate stuff, global warming. Look, we got the model that'll solve everything. And there's not a problem with climate.
So give me an example with the problem. Give me an but therefore example.
Well, okay. So when we work with all these organizations, everybody from the World Bank to Pfizer to Gates Foundation, all of them using the ABT, the starting point is the problem. And we begin by saying, tell me what your problem is in 5 words or less. And that the scientists,
that's what I was trying to do before. Yes. I think that's what I was looking for, and I lost it somewhere in the pool.
That's it. And that's your focusing tool, because that's the ultimate thing that focuses the brain is the problem. And then getting it down to 5 words or less. And what happens with the scientist? Well, I need 3 paragraphs. No, I want it in 5 words or less. And you don't have to give us the full context. Just your problem is no more funding.
I think a lot of people are afraid of the word "to problem." I think that's the thing, because when you say it a couple times to me, I'm like, oh man, problem, right? Like sometimes that brings up red flags in your head. It makes it very hard.
It activates the brain. And that's the number one thing that activates the brain is the problem. And that's where it all begins. And not only that, I have visited and talked at length with neurophysiologists, particularly one guy at Princeton. And he has shown me the work that they do where they put people in the MRI and they have them listen to a story, and you could see their functional MRI activity there, the brain activity. And on the word "but," you could see the brain light up, So it was a nice day. We're walking along, but then a thunderbolt struck, and right there on the word "but," the brain, that's the word to introduce the problem, the contradiction. And so this is where it all begins, is getting clear on what is the problem that you're working on. And you shouldn't go any further until you've got complete clarity and agreement on the problem. So our model is something we call working circles. And it's 5 people. One person, we're working on their narrative, their ABT. The other 4 have been trained in this stuff, and they're listening. And they're not allowed to go forward until they've got complete consensus on what is the problem in 5 words or less. And sometimes they'll eat up the whole half-hour session still arguing on what the problem is.
So we were talking about an example too, right? Yeah. So could you go back to that? Show me the example that you were going to...
Oh, the example of a problem?
Yeah, like a problem with the 5 words or less, then going through the ABT format to try to solve that problem.
Oh, the problem is nobody sequenced this gene, We've been studying this disease, been studying whatever disease for 100 years, and we've made a lot of progress on it. But there's this one crucial gene that we've never been able to sequence because we don't have the ability to get down to this scale and do this, this, and this. Therefore, we're launching this whole new project that is going to finally sequence that gene. And when it does, then we're going to be able to do all these great things. That's the basic logical structure.
Poetry in motion right there. That's what that is.
Yes, that's what it is. And when you start to get to, it's this ideal configuration, which turns into puzzle solving, because you have all this information and then you got to figure out the right pieces in the right place. And you don't want to start with the problem. And man, this goes on. I've spent 3 hours this morning in discussions with my group about this very thing, which is I'm just about done with fricking Substack. This morning, I woke up to, subscribe to Paul Krugman, the great economist, and his post this morning is titled The Theory of Enshittification. You want to know what Substack turned into? It's turned into an enlarged version of Twitter. Most of what these people are filling Substack full of is them just bitching about problems without the setup. And if all you do is go right to the problem, why is it important? What's the context? Right. Context is the hard thing.
A little bit about Substack. I haven't.
Oh, you don't know about Substack?
No, I haven't.
Oh, okay. So Substack's what every major pundit now has got their own Substack. What do you call it? You subscribe to them.
So, okay. So it's like a subscription-based model type of thing. That's what you call it? Or is there a specific platform?
Any major columnists, Maureen Dowd, David Brooks, Thomas Friedman, Nicholas Kristof, all the major columnists that I follow in the New York Times, who are wonderful. And then they're on their Substack. So if you put in substack.com, you can see, and they all got one. You could subscribe for free and you'll get their daily rants. But then you could pay them money and get extra insights of what they do. And they do podcasts. You might want to do one for this whole.
Yeah, that'd be kind of fun. Substack. Yeah. Hey, what's up? We're gonna get
look into it.
They can sponsor this video.
There you go. Yes, exactly. And that's right. You get subscribers that's the model is that, everybody can do it for free. But then if they're really passionate, they get extra things. It's stuff that was already happening. But in the past year or so, it's really kind of congealed, I would say, into what it is now. I opened my Substack about 6 months ago. My assistant began to lobby me for it. Look, we got to get on board with this. And so we built a whole bunch of stuff and we're putting all the content out there. And it's great because we are building something with the ABT model.
Right.
That's all fine. But once I started subscribing to all these people, man, something's going on right now. This is being well documented that the airways are really getting another level of being glutted. And for me, the biggest moment of realization was just a month ago when John Oliver did his segment about AI slop. He does really high quality writing segments. Each show has got about a 20-minute segment. He dives into a topic, and he dove into this topic of AI slop. And he began with this wonderful, sweet woman who was just, middle-aged woman talking about, I've always loved Pinterest. And what I love so much about Pinterest is I like to go on. There's this one category there where people post photographs of what they've done in their backyards, with architecture and furniture and all these sorts of things. And they're all wonderful and they're inspiring, except now 80% of those images are all AI generated now.
Yeah.
And then he went from that, he cuts to the schmucks that are teaching people how to do that. And these guys are saying, here's my technique. If you go and make 1,000 of these images and put them out there, all you need is one to go viral and you're going to make $10,000 overnight. And so all these people are doing that. They're producing 10,000 images or whatever. They're glutting the airwaves. Now Pinterest, 80%, all these things are going to lose.
Monetization is reduced drastically because there is so much content now. And I heard in 2025, it's just become so much harder to even, blow up, to have people watch your content because there's such a flood of content because of AI. It really helped people.
That's got to be what's going on. Exactly. And so I don't know what to say. We'll keep doing our ABT stuff and we've got a really substantive thing that we train people with. And the thing about AI, and ChatGPT is that it's all very impressive. But if you don't have narrative intuition, if you don't know what you're looking for, it's just a big dazzling thing that does nothing for you. You need to know what your narrative is. And once you get that clear, and that's what the ABT is, it gives you the central core narrative. So that's what we do. But it is really kind of distressing to watch this stuff. And that's my revelation this morning, was finally just looking at all these posts for the day on Substack from all these different people. They're all going right to the problem. They're all saying, Trump did this, everybody's doing this, Republicans are doing this, blah, blah, blah. And we're losing the ability to set up context. This is well documented for Hollywood. Movies now are no longer bothering with setups mostly. They're more and more opening with total chaos. And then the audience just like, yeah. And what good is that?
Right.
And I have friends of mine that direct major documentaries with Netflix and Hulu and places like that. And we talk at length, and they're all fans of the ABT, and they confirmed for me exactly my suspicions, which is they say the bosses don't want anything slow anymore. They don't want any setup at the beginning. They want to begin with, if you're going to tell about some tragedy that happened, we don't want to waste any time setting it up and getting to know the people. We wanted to begin with the ship blowing up.
Well, it's because visual is much more, it gets to people.
But it is this basic 3-act structure that is age old and is becoming a casualty of the information age, which is that there's so much information. People are getting so swamped that they're losing the ability to sit there and listen to a good story. And that's really sad, I think.
Wow. I mean, I've seen that happen a lot nowadays. I mean, if we're talking about, social media platforms, we can connect that with TikTok, right? I mean, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but at the same time, short form content is everywhere. It's on Facebook. It's on multiple different areas. And this happens all the time.
Okay, let's start a whole new line of conversation.
Sure, let's go for it.
That will parallel with that. It'll converge back.
Whatever.
So let's start from scratch here with a whole new topic. In 1975, there was a postdoctoral researcher at the Scripps Institute in La Jolla, big biomedical research facility. And he published a 3-page paper in there, 1975, once again, titled Medical Obfuscation, Structure and Function. And it was a 3-page little essay about, we've hit a problem now, which is that 100 years ago, doctors and scientists communicated with clarity. They spoke with simple language, and they could understand each other really well. And even their written language, when you read things that were written from back then, they've got a great deal of clarity with the English language. But here in 1975 now, we've developed this academic world. And these articles in the New England Journal of Medicine, for example, he picked up as part of this article he wrote and flipped through and picked 3 articles and went through and he put together a top 10 list of 10 different ways in which the writing style creates obfuscation, with the word obfuscation meaning just confusion that is unnecessary. Something that could have been simple to understand is made overly complicated and nobody can follow what the hell you're doing. And it's a very important word in today's world. But he talks so powerfully, and in there in his discussion, he said Galileo's fundamental work, The Starry Messenger, was an exercise in bold and vivid and clear exposition and explanation that you can still read to this day. What happened that they used to communicate so well, and now we're drowning in this obfuscation stuff? Well, here's the most important point about that 3-page thing that was published there. The author was a guy named Michael Crichton, wrote a book called Jurassic Park. This was the last thing he did as a scientist. So I have followed in his footsteps to some extent. I have not become the big Hollywood hit that he was, but I left the science world with a full, churning away science career. I walked away from it to go to film school and to get engaged in filmmaking and that medium. That's the same thing he did on a much bigger scale, which was when he went to Harvard Medical School and then he did his residency in Boston. And while he was even training as a doctor, he began to write science fiction, suspense novels, thriller novels. Right. And he wrote them under a pen name and they became popular. And eventually he wrote The Andromeda Strain and became a bestseller. And he was still in the biomedical world at that point. And everybody in Hollywood was buying his stuff and flying him out. And finally it got to be too much. He couldn't keep both careers going. So that was his final farewell, was this postdoc he did at the Salk Institute. And that essay that he wrote there on medical obfuscation. Well, that was exactly what I'm talking about, is nobody buys a solution unless they have a problem. He pinpointed the problem right there, which is if you people don't start thinking about the mess that you're doing with communication, you're going to end up with these mountains of information that are unusable because they're all obfuscation. So that's one piece of the puzzle. And another piece is Marshall McLuhan, the media scholar in the 1960s, right near the end of his life, he warned about something that he labeled as the information maelstrom. And in the late 70s, just before he died, he said, we're gathering so much information now that we're going to hit a point someday where it turns into the maelstrom. That was a concept that Edgar Allan Poe wrote in a poem, which is this idea of this vortex where everything is swirling around, total chaos, and you can't make sense of anything anymore. And what he says, we're going to hit a point where the amount of misinformation finally ends up.
I think we already have.
And that's where we are now.
We're already, it's past that. It's like already now. The misinformation is so much. There's so much misinformation.
That's it.
We can't even discern what is real and what isn't. And a lot of people can't. And you know what? The reality is this has been kind of something that's been going on from the dawn of time. You know,
okay,
really,
so now
in the 1900s, if you look at, the newspaper, who's to say who had control of the newspaper, which ultimately impacted us? It was not at the same
But now
scale.
that I've led you to the information maelstrom, which I think really solidified with the pandemic, that's where it all just went insane. Now bridge from there back to what you're talking about with the housing rules for California and all that stuff.
Right.
I mean, isn't it the same thing? You get the point where you got so many regulations, you can no longer do it.
Yes. And look at what happened with California. California had a booming film industry.
Yeah.
We lost that.
Yes.
And we're still losing it. And there is a way for us to change that.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of regulation that can be changed. Tax credits. Yeah. We had a lot of them before. They completely reduced it. There's a lot of issues there.
Yeah.
And if we just change policy, a lot of businesses would come back.
Yeah.
And it's one of the most beautiful places to live. We love living here. The problem is that for businesses, it's extraordinarily difficult.
And I think the change happens one of two ways. Either it happens positively and people fix it, or it happens negatively and it just explodes and melts down and rebuilds itself somehow.
I feel like we're going to get a soft sizzle. And then it's like, I know, right? That sounds funny, but that's what we're doing right now. It
sounds like you're getting into Manny's world now. Sorry.
That's funny. We're going to keep that one. Good inside joke right there.
Tell him about that this evening if he's there.
But the reality is it needs to change. I think it will change one of these days when we start we've already seen a net negative migration, right? That's the problem. And if we start seeing more of it, eventually housing prices are going to collapse. And then once we see that, we're going to see a reduction in GDP, and all of that is just going to culminate.
Are the fires driving some of that?
They helped. They helped that net migration because people who are very attached to their homes in these quite wealthy areas who have, even sometimes medium-sized businesses, even if they were CEOs of large companies, maybe they're CEOs of middle to small-sized companies, generational family businesses. Yeah. That has aided in people leaving.
My house burned up 6 years ago in the Woolsey fire. And in my weird case.
Wait, where were you? Where were you located?
Point Dume in Malibu.
Oh, God.
And I lived in a great house for 12 years, but there's lots of little buts with my situation because being a bachelor, no kids, and only renting this house for 12 years. Granted, it was an incredible house right on the cliff there at Point Dume.
Right.
And granted, I lost every material good that I had overnight in that thing. So it was very shocking for a number of months for me. And it's way worse for the families that got hit by something like that. And it is just devastating. To the point where it would cause you and all your friends to start looking around the country. Where can I live somewhere that this will never, ever happen? I've got a lot of friends that have said to me, I would never move to California. I don't want to be anywhere near something that catastrophic, which happens at such a large scale. There's a little bit of randomness with fire. There on Point Dume, there were some blocks where, 2 or 3 houses got hit and others weren't touched. But that said, you look at what happened in Pacific Palisades, entire neighborhoods were wiped out.
Concrete building. I feel like a lot of people are going to start doing more concrete.
You would think.
Hopefully. It might be in the legislation. That would be a good thing to do. is to make it so then, people would actually do that. Yeah. And, look, I love architecture. I love beautiful buildings. That's one of the things I love about California is they have so many different homes and not everything's just planned development, right?
And you grew up here?
Yeah. Born and raised. I grew up in Woodland Hills, lived around this area.
That's amazing.
I lived in Burbank near West Olive Street. I lived in Century City off of Avenue of the Star. I've lived everywhere. I've lived literally all across the city.
In Los Angeles.
Yeah. I've been to a bunch of places. My dad's from France. So, So we used to go there every year and go see family in Paris. And oh my God.
How do you pronounce pronounce your last name?
Mascarade. It's a little, it's like a masquerade ball.
Yeah. No, when I looked at it, I thought, wow, Mascarade. Yeah.
It's
exactly.
like,
Mascarade.
It's a lot of fun. We're having a ball.
We're having a ball.
Look, so we can go back to ABT if you want. I mean, we can go into ABT. I mean, like,
I work for you.
not that much. I'm not paying you yet. Who knows? We'll see after these messages. No, but one of the things that I love about the framework is that you get to really focus on who is it that you want to try to emulate. You know, my business and the way that I was trying to structure my business, I needed to focus on how do I differentiate myself from my competitors, right? And by using the ABT formula, it gives you that ability, right? It shows you, okay, what are my competitors doing with the and? Yep. Shows you with the but, okay, what's their bottleneck? What is going on? And how do I compete in the marketplace? And how do I win? And that is very valuable. A lot of people, like, they need to get that win down. They need to understand the bottleneck, but they also really need to understand what is it that you can provide these individuals that's better than others.
That is absolutely the truth. And that's why, Park Howell. And so, I brought you this copy of The Narrative Gym. Yeah. So this was, just a few words on the training, where this all came from. Well, where the whole thing came from, because it's very relevant. 2000.
Let me see the book.
Oh yeah, sure.
There. Check out of that.
Park's great. Yeah. And he's so what happened was, in the course, we started with the pandemic. We amped it way up, and I wrote a first book out of the course. And then Park was one of my guest lecturers, and he said, nice book by my business people will never buy this book unless you put business on the cover. Uh-huh. So he and I did the rewrite on this. That then led to the law version with our lawyer, to the politics version with my politics guide, to the medicine version with the doctor, to the science version.
And within these iterations, how did they change each other? Like what changed in the business iteration versus the law iteration? Because they kind of overlap.
We kind of have a boilerplate 7 chapters. And what we do is sort of introduce it. The 7th chapter is 5 applications of the ABT in the business world, in the law world. So really bring it to life. And then along the way, we form one ABT for a hypothetical topic, and then we tweak it and show, here's how you use this. These are different parts of it. There's a whole, it gets a little more detailed than the 3 words, but therefore each of the 3 words breaks down into 2 sub-elements, because communication at the broadest and simplest of all levels works best when you go from the general to the specific. So if you want to connect with the group, the best thing you can do is start off by, saying something really broad and general to get things up and going, and then get into the specifics. One of the fundamental rules that I pulled from the story world of Hollywood is the power of storytelling rests in the specifics. And so that's one of the fundamental dynamics. As a matter of fact, you can see going on right now with the Epstein stuff. Everybody wants the specifics.
We're going there.
Quit giving, we're not going to get into it, but this is in the news every day, which is all they keep coming out with, these generalities. Mm-hmm. And there's no power and strength in the generalities. Name names, damn it. The power of storytelling rests in the specifics. Right. And as soon as somebody starts naming names and getting specific, everybody leans in. Now it's getting interesting. So that's a universal dynamic for all communication. And then within the ABT, you iterate that 3 times.
Do you feel like you used ABT a lot when you were, creating a lot of your films? Like even before forming it in its totality. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, the ABT is absolutely everything. And guess where I learned it from? The South Park guys. So that's the origin of it. And what happened was in 2009, I wrote my first book. So I went to film school in the mid-90s, left the science world, and I told the science people, don't give up on me. I'm going to go learn stuff there that will be helpful to you. I'll come back to the science world and help you communicate better. I did exactly that. Went to film school 3 years, got out, made a whole bunch of films. And then by 2009, had learned enough stuff over the course of 15 years from the film world that was relevant to the science world that I sat down and wrote a first book called Don't Be Such a Scientist. And it began to present some of these. The reason communication science goes bad is, for example, you guys get so caught up in your head, people can't understand you. That's one of the simplest of all dynamics. And so that came out in 2009. All the major institutions, it got good reviews. They began to invite me to come do visits, and they kept saying, we want you to do a workshop. What do you do it on? And I said, I don't know. But the biggest chapter I wrote in the book was called Don't Be Such a Poor Storyteller. That's what everybody, the scientists ought to learn, how to get better at storytelling. And then 2 years later in 2011, by sheer coincidence, Comedy Central had a documentary on the making of South Park with the two, do you know the two guys, Trey Parker and Matt Stone? Okay. So it was them. And what had happened by 2011 was that show began in 95 when I was in film school. I remember the very beginnings of their tapes circulating around the film business. And in the beginning, it took them a month to make one episode of the thing. By 2011, computer animation advanced so much that they could then do it one episode per week. So that documentary is called 6 Days to Air. Okay, so on Monday, they have their whole staff meeting with the writers. They pitch the ideas. They formulate the story on Monday. They go to work writing Tuesday. And then they cut to a scene on Wednesday night, and Trey Parker's in his office, and he's sitting at his laptop, and he looks in the camera and he says, and now what happens Wednesday night, we do every week, is that I sit down with the first draft of the script. It's 45 pages long, and I go through the script, and every time I see the word and, I ask myself, could I change that and to a but or a therefore? Every time you change an and to a but or a therefore, the storytelling gets better and more interesting. So I'd been through 3 years of USC film school, 5 writing courses, all this stuff, all these years of filmmaking. I'd never heard storytelling conveyed in such simple terms. But if there's one thing I knew as being trained as a scientist, is the power of simplicity. So I sat up and played that thing back like 10 times and wrote down and transcribed everything he said. Then I started calling all my screenwriter friends saying, have you ever heard of this simple dynamic of ands, buts, and therefores? And all of them said no, but it makes total sense to me. So then I started digging in on these 3 things and realizing, wait, this is a template. This is exactly what we did there. You know, you can tell the whole story of something with this and this, but then this happened, therefore this. And I began to realize the breadth and depth of it. Then one of my professor buddies at USC, Marty Kaplan from the Norman Lear Center, he started digging around, and there was this great screenwriting instructor there, legendary, Frank Danielle, who created a whole approach to screenwriting. And Marty found a speech in 1986 where Frank laid it out really crystal clear. And it's so simple. He's talking about screenwriting, but applies to everything. He's in 2 paragraphs. He says, when we sit down to write a first draft, we always make the dreaded mistake of telling the story as a series of and thens. And then I did this, and then I did this, and then I did this, and then I did this. It's in the revisions that we go back and we take out those and thens and replace them with buts and therefores. And then I did this, but then I did this. That changes the direction. That activates the brain, starts to make it interesting. Then you propel forward with therefore. And so now, if you search on the web a little bit about South Park and but therefore, you'll find one video in particular of the 2 guys giving a talk at NYU Film School explaining their version of and, but, and therefore. And the thing that sort of didn't happen, and this is where I think I fit into the puzzle, is that those 2 guys, they could have written a textbook in 2011 and they could be the gurus of the ABT. But why would you do that when you're making $100 million with an animated thing? You know, why waste your time being a teacher? Yeah. So I'm the schlub who came along and became the teacher and began to develop it and seeing the power of it in the science world. And then it's been 15 years now of propagating that. And we've kind of gone through 3 phases. Phase 1 was me just testing it out for a year. I gave a TED Med talk in 2013 that, you know, got a lot of views. And off of that, people began to validate it. Like, yeah, you're onto something really valuable there. 2015, I wrote my second really significant book. Houston, we have a narrative from University of Chicago Press, which is the biggest academic press in North America. And that book laid down the foundation of the ABT. And then that book has, you know, got 250 reviews or something on Amazon. So it's widely used in a lot of courses and things like that. And at the end of that, I proposed this idea. I said, you know, here's the dream vision, is that we start to create what's called narrative intuition. That's where you work with this ABT so much that you can begin to just feel it when you communicate. You can feel, I'm not getting enough contradiction here. I'm not activating the story enough. You can feel it. I'm not moving forward enough. I need some more. Therefore, what is this all going to lead to? What's the point of it all? And as you develop that, you move it from just some rules you've memorized down to a gut level where you can feel like the reason that was such a boring talk was the guy never got to the therefore. And people now learn that ability to critique things. And so then we did for 5 years. I said the dream scenario is what I call narrative culture, which is that you got a whole organization where everybody's been trained in the ABT. Then they can get together in little groups and they can critique their work they're doing. And that's when you really start to hit these higher lows.
That makes a lot of sense.
And that's what we're doing now with FAA, their Aviation Research Center in Atlantic City, New Jersey. We've been working with them for 4 years now. And now every Wednesday we have our narrative gym meeting, and it's usually 15 to 20 people that show up, and they're practicing it week after week. And then they break off in their own little group. That's the model right there. And when you get that, people stop being quite so boring. They start to develop a sensitivity.
And are they using it in regards to their current projects to explain to seniors?
Yeah.
Or okay. So because it's like a Zoom oriented, or how is it oriented? I want to hear.
Here's one example right in the middle of working with them on is that one of their bosses said, we need to present these research findings we're having, but I need a short little format for them. And they came up with this thing called search to results. And they're 1-minute videos where they use the ABT to structure it. And so they take this whole giant thing that they've just done testing out, some new form of fire resistant materials. And they've done all these experiments and things. And then they boil that all down into a 1-minute video using the ABT. So we've been working on fire retardant materials for, 50 years, and we've got these sorts of things. But the one thing we've never managed to really do is this. Therefore, we built this device that now lets us do that. And now we're getting these results. Does that make sense?
No, that makes so much sense.
Yeah.
And if somebody like layman wanted to get in on these groups, do you have like a weekly or a monthly mastermind or group that you host?
We have sort of an internal group that I'm going to invite you to.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like the sound of that.
Exactly. Exactly. You call it the ABT Kindred Spirits. It's not quite ready to break out into a huge audience. It's about 30 people a week that show up for it. But we do a training now that has evolved over the 15 years. And it went from a great big complicated thing in the beginning. We were trying to get everything across to we've learned that the key element is repetition. Mm-hmm. And so now we do a thing called the mini course. And if anybody listening has got a company that they really would like to do this with, it's very simple and practical. We've got a guy with a small pharmaceutical company right now that next month will be doing it with 12 of his executives. And it just goes Monday to Friday. And it's not much time at all. It's 2.5 hours total during the week. Mm-hmm. Monday is an hour lecture. But the important thing is that every day they do a new draft of their 1-sentence ABT. And so they take the ABT of the project they're working on. They submit a first draft that's terrible. And then at the end on Monday, when they listen to the 1 hour thing, they revise it, what they picked up there. On Tuesday, we give them written notes. On Wednesday, we get another lecture. On Thursday, we do 15-minute conferences with each individual. And then on Friday, we pull them all together and we show that we have them read their finished ABT, the 5th draft, and then we reread the first one that's terrible. Right. And everybody gets to see the arc of the week, which is, oh my God, since Monday, look at where we've come from that mess to this is really structured now and everybody can get it. And we do that and it's $500 a person. And we usually have a group of about 12 people. And it's really fun. And mostly that thing on Friday is just mind bending, like, wow. And then they go off and start to put it to work themselves. But that's evolved into our we think we're doing the 7th or 8th one now. We're doing it with that small pharmaceutical. We're doing it with FAA. We're doing the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. And there's a bunch in World Bank. We work with them a bunch and we're doing very powerful and functional. But the key element is the repetition. And that's the thing. You can't learn this stuff in one day story. And that's the thing that's so bogus. And I knew this from the beginning. Go on the internet. You'll see all these people with their magical one afternoon workshop in how to tell a good story. It's not going to happen in one afternoon. No, it is a lifelong thing. It's through the repetition that you shape this stuff, but you can get a lot better through repetition.
100%. Well, thank you so much for coming.
You betcha.
I loved having you.
Yes.
And this was just such a pleasure. Thank you so much. Love it.